Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. If you need coffee and you're tired of drinking that stuff that tastes like it came from the bottom of a zombie's shoe, swing by Organic Man Coffee Trike and get some of the best coffee on the planet. 4501 McPherson if you're in Laredo, or organicmancoffeetrike.shop. I started out working on a show on weird beast sightings. It kind of morphed into mostly stories from Texas. Since I live here, I'm kind of partial to stories from my own state. I'll talk about beasts later on. A 40-year-old woman and her niece said that they saw a ghostly humanoid entity in southeast Texas area. Kay says that her and her 8-year-old niece were sitting in their vehicle parked on Bragg Road. They had gone there to see the ghost lights. This is a common thing in this part of Texas. There's a huge sign on the side of the road telling you that that's where you need to be. Turn here to see the ghost lights. It was nighttime and dark as the pair sat there waiting for the lights to appear. They sat there for about 20 minutes, excited to hopefully have another worldly encounter that they could tell folks about. A green light came into view. It was moving in their direction. Kay said this must be the lights that everybody is talking about. It was getting closer as they sat there wondering what it might be. They had come in from 1293, so their car was facing south. Kay said that she took her glasses off so they could she could clean them. And then when she put her glasses back on, she looked out the window, and there was a man walking towards them on the road. He was dressed like an old-time railroad worker. He was carrying a green lantern in one hand. Her niece saw this man as well. This was far more exciting than any old lights. This guy looked like he'd just stepped off an 1800s train. As the image got closer, Kay noticed that this guy didn't have a head. This caused her to scream, which then caused her niece to scream as well. The man got closer, and then he vanished. The two were so shook up they couldn't do anything for a few minutes. They just sat there waiting for whatever it was that might happen next to happen. Once the shaking had gone away, Kay got them going so they could head back home and think about what it was they'd just encountered. It was about a 30-minute drive from one end of Bragg Road to the other. They were sitting about in the middle, so Kay just drove to 770. As they were driving along, they saw the green light once more up ahead, but it faded away as they got closer to it. The light vanished before they got to Saratoga. Saratoga, Texas might sound familiar to some of y'all. A Bragg Road is an 8-mile long dirt road that runs north and south, going from Saratoga to Bragg. In 1902, the Santa Fe Railroad cut a line through the dense thicket between Saratoga and Bragg. Tracks were needed for hauling oil from the Saratoga oil fields along with logs and cattle. One train per day took lumber and oil south to Beaumont, returning with supplies for the folks living in the area. Time marched on, and the town of Bragg was eventually abandoned when the oil field dried up. There's only a wide spot in the road to show where the town used to sit. 1934, the tracks were removed, leaving behind just a sandy road, which was used mostly by hunters who kept the thicket from reclaiming it. Around that time, some folks began to mention they were seeing a strange light traveling along the road. The most often told story is that a railroad man was decapitated in a train wreck. So now he holds a lantern high above his neck as he walks up and down the road looking for his head. In another story from back when things were rotten, sometimes the men doing all the work went without getting paid. There is a story going around of a group of men from Mexico who were working on the railroad. When it came time to pay them, the foreman killed them and buried their bodies somewhere along the rail line. The light being seen is supposed to be their spirits trying to get back home. Colony, Texas is 20 miles north from downtown Dallas, right in Louisville Lake, or on, not in. It would be kind of wet if it was in the lake. It's right on Louisville Lake. Back in 1996, right after school had let out for the summer, a bunch of kids decided that it would be a cool thing to do to visit the Zion Cemetery. Going to the cemetery late at night was one thing. Bringing a Ouija board along was just not something I would have done. The Zion Cemetery was in Frisco, Texas, which is right next door. There were a lot of tombstones showing dates of births and deaths that were too close together. These must have been young kids who died sometime in the 1800s. The visitors decided to ask some questions about these kids' graves. They opened the board and they sat there with it on their knees. One of the gang asked if there was anyone who wanted to speak to them. When doing any ghost investigation, I find a quick introduction works best. Tell the spirits who you are and why you're there. Then ask your questions using a recording device. Several people have said, what's the difference between doing EVPs and using a talking board? An EVP catches the sounds made by the spirits without actually inviting them to come join you. A Ouija board opens a portal to God knows where, and it lets anything come over. The kids in the cemetery thought they were talking to a 5-year-old girl who had died back in the 1800s. She didn't tell them much, saying she didn't have any answers. Just a friendly little chat with a dead girl. The next night, they decided they were going to go back and try it some more. The driver pulled into the parking area, and everybody got out. Two of them went ahead to the cemetery while the others were busy doing other things. Right next to the gate sat a huge black car. On the far side of this car, there was a couple sitting on a blanket, just kind of admiring the full moon. The two would-be investigators stopped and they stared at this couple on the blanket. The man stood up and he said hi and he told them that he was just there visiting his wife. The woman sat there, not moving at all. One of the kids noticed that her hair and her clothing was all wet. There was no sprinkler going anywhere around the cemetery, and it hadn't rained in the last several days. It was unexplainable as to why the woman was all wet or why she just sat there not moving. The two kids looked at the man who was standing there in front of them, and that's when they noticed that he didn't have any legs. He was just hovering in air. They ran back to the car, telling the others it was time to go. The others, seeing the panicked look on their faces, decided it was time to go, and everybody piled into the car to get out of there fast. The windows were all down on the car, and the moonroof was open. As they were pulling away from the cemetery, everyone in the car heard what sounded like children laughing just all around the car. They drove to a local fast food restaurant and they stopped there to catch their breath and try to come to grips with what had just happened. They were all standing around the car when one of them noticed there were small handprints in the dust all along the back of the car. The prints went from the back bumper all the way up to the back of the moonroof. This was all it took to get everyone to swear they were never going to go to the graveyard again, and they sure as heck weren't going to play with a Ouija board. One of the highways running through Port Neches, just south of Beaumont, is called Sarah Jane Road. The name comes from a woman who lived nearby back during the Civil War. Like a lot of folks back then, Sarah was at home alone with her young baby while her husband away fighting those nasty savages, the Yankees. Before the war, everybody was just a part of the same country. As hostilities grew, the hatred and the fear between the North and the South escalated. A lot of nasty things were being done by soldiers on both sides, and the stories would enlarge with each telling. Once Robert E. Lee had surrendered on April 9th, 1865, most of the fighting had stopped, but the war wasn't really over yet. The Battle of Palmito Ranch was fought May 12th and 13th in 1865, a month later. As the Union Army was marching through Texas, civilians were running for their lives. Stories of punishments and executions being handed out were preceding them by days. An army marches on their stomach, and the soldiers were stealing anything they could eat, as well as anything of value that they figured they were owed, since they weren't really getting paid a whole lot of money. As the Union Army was marching through Texas, they were getting closer to Sarah's home. She'd heard some of the things that those devils from the North had done. She was beside herself with fear. Not knowing what she should do, Sarah placed her infant in a wicker basket, and hid it under the bridge near her home. She went back to her home, and picturing the coming of the army and what they were probably going to do to her, she hung herself. There's no report of her husband ever returning from battle. He may have been one of the thousands killed, or he may have simply wandered off, too shook up and shocked by the things that he'd seen in battle. The baby under the bridge was never found, as far as anyone knows. Today, late at night, if you go to the area around the bridge, you'll hear a baby crying. Some folks have seen a light moving back and forth over the bridge. This is the ghost of Sarah out looking for her child. A few people have seen a woman in a full length dress walking across the bridge holding a lantern high above her head, looking for her lost child. In 2021, a woman, her daughter, and her daughter's friend were enjoying one of the many attractions on Galveston Island. Late night walks on the beach are a common thing. At about 3 a.m., the woman and the two girls went to an out of the way access road. Before getting out, she drove the car in a big circle so she could see if there was anyone or anything in the area before they got out. Didn't want any unwanted encounters. They parked next to a trash can that had been placed there by the Park Service. Stepping from the vehicle, the driver said that she felt as if the air had suddenly grown quite heavy and thick. She felt as if it was probably a good idea to get back in the car and leave immediately. There was no moon, and the dunes were dark and foreboding. But the kids wanted to walk on the beach, and so she gritted her teeth and went with them. She did get a big flashlight out of the trunk of her vehicle, the kind that you can pound an attacker to a pulp, which also just happens to have a convenient taser attached to it. You can buy one of these cool devices at Amazon.com. Just don't test it out on anybody that you want to talk to afterwards. They're not going to like you if you use it on them. The trio walked down to the water and they moved about looking at the waves. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed her daughter's friend suddenly spun around and was facing back towards the car. The young girl said that she had heard some kind of weird sounds coming from around the vehicle. She steered the woman's hand holding the flashlight to where she had heard the sound. They could all see there was something standing next to the vehicle, but it was hard to see because every time the light was right on it, it seemed to fade out of view. As soon as the light moved away, the overcast from the flashlight would illuminate it. As they stood there wondering what this thing was, the woman said that she was now overwhelmed by this bad feeling. It was time to leave. She managed to get the two girls walking back to the car. As they got close, the friend spotted this thing was now crouching over by the trash can, and it seemed to be facing away from them. The thing looked to be far enough away that they thought they could get to the vehicle unhindered. Running to the doors, they piled in, and the woman got the engine fired up. As the headlights came on, the thing by the trash can stood up. It looked like a man, sort of. It was about 6.5 feet tall. The face was blank. It only had two black holes where the eyes should have been. The chin just kind of blended down into the chest as if there were no neck. The arms were way too long, and it was dressed in some kind of a robe that hung all the way to the ground. Driving away from the beach, not a word was said. It wasn't until they had arrived back home that anybody could voice what they had all seen. From time to time after that, any time the three were together, they would ask each other what they thought they had encountered, but they've still come up with no answers. Two men were working at a glycol plant in Beaumont. At 2 a.m., the plant was doing a unit startup. Anytime machinery needed to be serviced or replaced, it would get shut down, and then they would fire it back up, which meant that all the pipes and the valves and everything had to be checked for leaks. It took a while to turn the machinery back on. After getting things in order, the two men jumped in their truck and they were driving back to the maintenance shop. As they went, the driver saw something odd. Some kind of a creature was walking along the side of the road down on all fours. He swung the truck so that the headlights would shine on this thing. The creature's face looked like a barn owl, kind of flat and heart shaped. The body was more like a huge black male panther, maybe 200 or more pounds. The driver asked the partner, "What the heck is that thing?" And they both got out and stared at it. The creature was looking back at them as it moved away, and then it stood up on 2 feet. It began walking away from the men as they just stood there staring at it. These two men were both hunters, and they knew most of the animals you would find in Texas. This was something neither man could identify. They quickly moved back to the pickup and jumped in. As the doors were slammed shut, this thing vanished into the darkness. Once back at the maintenance shop, they both sketched what they had seen. Their drawings were the same. Word began to spread throughout the plant that these two men had seen an owl-faced monkey panther. Now, there's a name you're not going to hear mentioned too often. The owl-faced monkey panther. Yeah, I can see somebody writing a book about that soon. All the joking and the ridicule at the plant caused these two men to kind of distance themselves from each other, and they stopped talking about it. As far as can be found, and nobody else has reported anything similar, but then why would they, considering the amount of ridicule the first two witnesses had? I've been in Laredo since 1988. There are a lot of stories in this town of ghosts, cryptids, mysteries that nobody can solve. Some can be just urban legends, but a lot of them are based on actual happenings. Here are a few things to keep in mind as you're walking along some dark and spooky road, or laying there in bed at night trying to go to sleep. Schools tend to have a lot of stories, either because the kids like to pass things on, or all that energy that the kids have and they're willing to expend at a moment's notice just might attract spirits. We have two school districts. There's LISD and UISD. Both seem to hold on to some of their former students. Alma Pierce Elementary, there's a restroom that they say has been closed for years. Many folks claim that it was haunted by the ghost of a young girl. Others say it's some kind of a portal to another dimension. It was on a Halloween evening, and the school was holding a Jamaica, a small festival. Three girls named Ashley, Maria, and Tiffany were there looking around. Mary needed the facilities, and the three found an out of the way bathroom. While Mary was inside, the other two girls locked the door and then wandered away. Apparently, she was not really good close friend of theirs, just somebody they hung out with. Well, once if everything of interest had been looked at and pondered, Ashley and Tiffany decided it was time to go back home. About 2 hours later, Maria's mom called, wanting to know where was her daughter. Well, the two girls admitted that they had played a prank on her by locking her in the bathroom, and they'd accidentally forgotten to let her back out. It was way past closing time, and so they had to call the police to go unlock the door and let Maria back out, and Ashley and Tiffany were both in for a lot of trouble for their little prank. The police arrived at the school, and they went to the bathroom. They went to the room, not the that didn't sound right. The two police officers arrived at the school, and they walked over to the bathroom where Maria had been locked in. That sounded better. They pulled a latch and opened the and looked inside. Maria's shirt, pants, shoes, everything was neatly folded, sitting on the counter. The girl was nowhere to be found. They say that there was blood on the floor. There was only the one door and a small window that was locked from the inside. The school decided, with something like that having happened, they would simply lock the door and not use that one bathroom ever again. As far as anyone knows, Maria has never been found. Lamar Bruni Vergara Middle School is haunted by the ghost of a girl from LBJ High School, which is about 3 blocks away. The high school girl was shot and killed, and her body was left in a ditch near Lamar Middle School. Today, people report seeing a ghost walking up and down a hall at around 7 p.m. at night. This was the time the young girl had been killed. Clark Middle School, which is just a few blocks from my house, in the seventh grade hall outside of room 28, janitors have reported hearing voices at night. There have also been reports of children laughing and playing inside the room. On a few nights, the lights have been switched on and off at night. The computers in the room all come on and go off at the same time as well. Cigaroa Middle School, people say in the section of the school known as the sixth grade hall, you can hear a ball bouncing along the hallway, followed by the sound of a small kid chasing it. Janitors say that at about the same time the clocks in this part of the building all begin to spin like crazy. They've never been able to set them to the right time. Martin High School is said to be haunted because there was a cemetery where the school used to sit. The people who were in charge of moving the cemetery only took the headstones and not the bodies. At night, you can hear strange sounds, or you'll see shadows moving about the school gym. Way back, there had been a rifle range under the floor of the gym. Kids were taught firearms safety and marksmanship. Well, somebody wasn't paying attention and they shot and killed their best friend. Treat every weapon as if it is loaded until you know for a fact that it is unloaded, and then you still treat it like it's loaded. Never aim a weapon at anything that you do not intend to destroy, which includes other people. Well, somebody wasn't paying attention. The rifle range was closed and it was turned into storage. Anyone going down there will hear sounds of movement in the back of the room. Voices can be heard on occasion, and things get moved around on their own. People have said that they've seen a little boy with a red backpack moving around the building at night, especially around the gym and the cafeteria and what is known as the 400 wing. Teachers, coaches, faculty, and some students have all seen this little boy. They say he looks like a real person, but if you approach him, he doesn't say anything, he just disappears. The folks at Memorial Middle School have seen a priest on the top floor of the school. A lot of people couldn't understand why there would be a priest in the school. They had no idea that there was actually a history. Back in 1937, the school was originally known as St. Joseph's Academy, which was built by the Marist brothers. The academy was a part of Laredo's educational institution until 1973, when the Marist brothers decided to cease operations at that academy. November 1973, the Laredo Independent School District purchased the building in order to alleviate the crowded conditions at Nixon High School. Nixon High School has a headless ghost that roams its hallways. During the 1970s, a girl on a school dance team was killed by her jealous boyfriend. She was decapitated. Witnesses have seen her spirit roaming about the school with no head. It is said that you are in the school gym at night. You'll hear the sound of her spurs clicking on the floor as she walks back and forth. United High School has been haunted for years. Some say that they would see a dirty little girl under the portable classrooms, playing on the ground as if she's looking for something in the dirt. One night, a janitor was cleaning one of the portables. He picked up the trash and put it in a bag and rearranged all the desks. Then he stepped outside and locked the door. As he was about to walk away, he saw the lights come back on. He opened the door and looked inside. There was trash all over the floor, and the desks had all been messed up again. Well, he just closed the door and left. United Middle School, there's a section that is closed off because they say a girl was killed after a basketball game when the ball went rolling down the stairs. She ran to grab it, tripped, and went headfirst over the stairs. It is said that you can see her shadow and you hear her moving about the staircase where she died. The VMT Magnet School has reports of footsteps on the second floor, even though there's nobody up there. There's a foul odor that travels around the hallway, and people have encountered a cold spot that moves around. Now, like I said, schools all seem to be haunted, or at least if you ask the kids, they are. But I've gotten reports from so many people, police officers, cleaning staff, school teachers. I don't think they're all making it up. I think there's something to it. If you're in school, let me know if you've got any good ghost stories. Howard Johnson Hotel. It's right on the river. It's a big round building, and it was painted white so it was easy to see. It's changed names so many times that I can't keep track of what it's called today. This hotel was one of the largest buildings in Laredo, and it is also the only building in Laredo with a 13th floor. Now, I know any building with more than 12 floors is going to have a 13th floor, but people think that if they don't call it 13, if they call it the 14th floor, that somehow this will magically thwart the unlucky number. I've been inside the hotel a number of times, and yes, the elevator has a number 13 button. One of the workers in the hotel died many years ago, but he's still seen in the hotel today. He is seen cleaning the hotel room floors, and several guests and workers have seen him and talked to him, but he doesn't respond. He is seen wearing his traditional brown working uniform, and he constantly appears and disappears from sight. Other things reported in the building are scratching sounds in the 15th floor stairway, objects falling over for no reason, phone calls that are disrupted, or mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night. When the guests would answer the phone, there's nobody there. They also hear the sounds of children running up and down the hallway, which is odd because the hallways are all carpeted, and yet you hear the sound of their shoes on the floor. Mercy Regional Diagnostic Center used to be an old apartment building. It is just south of San Augustine High School in the Old Heights area. Reports of a demonic looking figure with glowing eyes and a wide grin that stretches from ear to ear, and it has a reptilian like tongue hanging down to its chest. People report seeing this creature all around the outside of the building. A story I have heard from many folks: at one time there was a satanic cult that performed their rituals in this area. One of the nursing homes is built right on top of one of their favorite sites. The old police station. Every time you go there, you hear footsteps and you can hear whispers being from behind you. Let me try that again. The old police station. Every time you go there, you will hear footsteps and whispers behind your back, and there are some spots that feel as if it is freezing. People also report seeing a headless cat roaming around the building. They say that this has to do with witchcraft, and that when they closed the police station, all of this activity just stayed there. It didn't move to the new building. Stories of witchcraft taking place is common here in Laredo. The practitioners moved about from place to place so that their rituals could be kept secret. The locations go from the south of town near McAllister Hill to the south gate of Laredo College, all the way to where the country club sits today. As housing would crop up in various areas, the late night crowd would move to a new location. The Texas Rural Legal Aid building is 3 blocks south of Martin High School. Workers have said that they have seen a dark shadow walking around from room to room, and occasionally it will stop and hover next to one particular desk, as if they're looking at some paperwork or something. Perhaps this is where the figure used to work. The staff, being curious, left a tape recorder running overnight in the staircase. They wanted to see if they would catch anything. Well, the next day, when they were listening to the tape, they heard the sound of footsteps coming up and going down the stairs. Then they heard somebody abruptly say, "No," in a really loud voice. And then the sound of somebody kicking the tape recorder down the stairs. That's where they found it in the morning the next day, and when they came to work the next morning. Zacate Creek. God, I've spent hours in Zacate Creek back when I had a job. A lady covered in mud, wearing a white dress, is said to be seen walking through Zacate Creek in La Azteca neighborhood. There is usually a foul odor in this area, and people say that it's either the sewage plant, which is right across the creek from the neighborhood, or maybe this smell is coming from the ghost. Believe me, that sewer plant at Zacate Creek used to close up your sinuses. The Circle K on McPherson Road has an apparition of a little girl wearing a sundress who walks up and down each aisle carrying a carton of milk in her left hand and a package of cookies in her right. She is seen walking up and down the aisles of the store, but they never see her come or go from the store, and she just seems to vanish as soon as people lose sight of her. I don't know which Circle K it is because there's several on McPherson. The Laredo Civic Center. A man had an accident where the dressing rooms are today. The weights that make the curtains move fell down and hit him in the head, killing him. It is now said that the janitors who work there will hear somebody walking back and forth across the floor. Sometimes he'll walk up and pinch one of the janitors. If you go up to the second floor where the dressing rooms are, to the left of the stage, you can see some cracks on the floor and on the wall where the weights landed. Laredo Fire Station number 2 is believed to be on an old grave site. Before the station was built, firefighters feel their legs being pulled off the bed at night when they're trying to sleep. Furniture shakes and moves, and they report of people being levitated out of their beds. They've seen a small boy hanging out in the supply room. The Hamilton Hotel, downtown Laredo, has quite a few spirits hanging out just about every floor. Over the course of its use by travelers, a few folks never checked out due to suicides, murders, or just plain accidents. The hotel was turned into a retirement home years ago. A small girl is seen in the lobby bouncing a ball against one wall. If anyone approaches her, she vanishes. People complain about children playing in the hallways at night. There are no children in the building. They've seen small footprints on the floor as if a child walked through a pile of flour and then tracked it all over the hallway. The footprints go along and vanish at the door to one of the rooms. They don't continue inside the room. People have checked. They've also seen a well dressed young woman riding up and down in the elevator. She'll smile at anybody that sees her and kind of wave, but they never see her getting off on any of the floors, and they never see her entering or leaving the lobby. The Laredo Health Department, there are apparitions of people who walk around once the office is closed. Lights flicker on and off, and the janitors often walk into cold spots. They find their cleaning supplies get moved without anybody being around. A little girl is heard running around, and a few people have seen her. She makes a lot of noise at night when the cleaning staff is working. She also likes to ride the elevators up and down. In the lowest floor of the building, they have a room where the supplies are all locked inside of a kind of a cage type room. The lock on that cage has been seen swinging back and forth as if somebody's playing with it. I've actually gotten the recording of this. The lock is just swinging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like some little kid is sitting there slapping it with their hand, and it just goes on long after it should have stopped swinging back and forth. The old Department of Public Safety office on Sandario has the spirit of a DPS trooper roaming the halls at night. People see this trooper and they wonder why he's there since it's not a DPS office anymore. And as they watch, he simply vanishes. He gets blamed for turning lights on and off, especially when people are in the rooms doing work. And he gets blamed for making a lot of noise out in the hallway. He slams doors and moves around the building, kind of just disturbing everyone that's there. La Posada Hotel is set right on the Rio Grande River across the street from San Agustin Church. People see shadows moving along the hallways when there's nobody there. Footsteps are heard going up and down the stairs in the lower parts of the building. There's a old fallout shelter in the basement from the 60s. Uh, People actually thought that you could hide from an atomic bomb and survive for the next, oh, I don't know, 600 years on what little supplies were stored away. Across from the San Augustine Church is a building that used to be a convent. There is a tunnel that runs under the street, but it's been closed for decades. Many people have seen a nun roaming around the building at night, and she's also been seen next door at the hotel, the La Posada. Other occurrences, such as shadowy sightings, cold spots, somebody calling other people's names, objects moving, or falling over with no explanation. You can clearly hear footsteps and running in the San Augustine ballroom when there's nobody in there. The Laredo Boys Club on Moctezuma and San Eduardo has quite a history. The land was, once again, a cemetery long ago. With people living on small ranches all over Webb County, graves were dug whenever one was needed. Soon there would be a small cemetery here and there and all over the outskirts of Laredo. As the city grew, these graveyards were all consolidated into one of three that we have today. A lot of bodies were never moved. Folks say that some, if not all, of the bodies are still under the ground. Some of them are under the boys' club. The people hired to dig up and move the bodies only took the tombstones away. At night, kids would stay in the gym, kind of like a giant slumber party. As they lay there in the dark, the sound of someone bouncing a ball could be heard. Looking around the room, there would be nobody up, moving about. Voices would be heard coming from the shower room. A lifeguard was sitting by the indoor pool when he spotted a young boy struggling to get up from the bottom of the water. The lifeguard jumped in and lifted the boy to the side of the pool. The water was only a few feet deep. The boy said that he could feel arms wrap around him and pull him under the water. Then it was holding him on the bottom of the pool. Thinking about it, the lifeguard realized the way the boy was thrashing around, it looked as if someone was holding him down. There was nobody in that end of the pool at the time. East of Laredo, just off of Highway 44, is FM 666, going north from Banquet. When you cross the Nueces River, you'll find yourself in San Patricio. Leading up to the Texas Revolution, Santa Anna had loaned out cannon to the small communities for defense purposes against bandits and hostile Indians. As the revolution was getting cranked up, Santa Anna ordered his troops to go out and confiscate all of this artillery so it couldn't be used against his army. At Gonzales, they erected a flag proclaiming, "Come and take it." And then the men of Gonzales chased the army back into Mexico. South of San Patricio, the lieutenant in charge of the garrison had received orders to seize the San Patricio cannon. He was friends with all of the locals. He had dinner at their homes all the time. He didn't want to stir up any trouble, but orders were orders. As a bluff, the lieutenant asked if he could borrow the cannon so that his men could have some artillery practice. The cannon was handed over just before word came from Gonzales on how the artillery was all being rounded up. The men of San Patricio rode to the garrison and they demanded they get the cannon back. A small battle broke out. Neither side had many men. The only casualty was the lieutenant. He was seriously wounded. The town folk, feeling bad about having hurt this young man, took him back with them to try to nurse him back to health. As he lay there on a bed in the front room of one of the houses, a young Spanish woman wearing a green dress suddenly appeared in the room, walked over, and sat down by his bed. The woman had just kind of appeared out of nowhere without anyone seeing or hearing her come in. She showed up several nights to sit by the young officer's bed, he was her fiance, watching as he slowly died. When the lieutenant was no longer alive, the women stopped showing up. Later, the townfolk found out that the lieutenant had been engaged to marry a young lady from Spain. She was waiting for him back in Mexico City, and she had died just days after her young man had died, as she was known for always wearing a green dress. This is a different kind of a ghost story. Her spirit was seen while she was still alive, like a doppelganger or a double goer. The only woman legally hung in Texas was Josefa Chapita Rodriguez. She lived in a shack on the edge of the river where she cooked for travelers and she would let them sleep on a cot on her front porch. When a man named John Savage fell victim to an axe murderer, Chapita was the prime suspect. $600 in gold was recovered from the river north of San Patricio, as well as Savage's body, which was hidden in a gunny sack. Josefa Rodriguez and her son Juan Silvera were indicted on circumstantial evidence. After Chapita pled not guilty, the jury recommended mercy, but the judge ordered her execution take place November 13th, 1863. Chapita was kept chained to a wall in the courthouse until the day of her hanging. Her coffin was placed in an unmarked grave. Many people say that they have seen her ghost, a woman with a rope wrapped around her neck, walking along the banks of the river near San Patricio. San Patricio has a lot of ghost stories. Uh, there was a battle fought there between the Texas revolutionaries and the people of San Patricio because confusion, I guess. The people of San Patricio did not want to revolt from Mexico. So the people of the Texas Republic decided that that was grounds to wipe out the city, which they did. You can still hear the sounds of fighting, guns being shot, men screaming, cannon being fired if you go there late at night and just listen. I've tried it. Unfortunately, I didn't hear anything. A man was driving through North Mission, Texas, when he spotted a nurse walking along the side of the street. It was 11 p.m., and he decided it would be a good thing to offer her a ride. The nurse told him that she was on her way to the hospital where she worked if he could drop her off there. He said he didn't really have the time to make the detour, but he could drop her off on the street that would take her to her destination, and she said that would be okay. As they drove along, she talked about all the things that she had done over her career as an RN. As they drew close to 2 Mile Road, she said that he could just let her out right there. He started to slow down when the nurse opened the door and jumped out. This was not what he expected, so he slammed on the brakes and looked back to see if she had landed on her feet, or was she going to be in need of the hospital herself. He saw her running along the side of the road, and then she suddenly leaped up into the air and flew away. With no idea what he'd just seen, no idea if he should tell somebody, he eventually managed to get going, heading towards his destination, wondering what the heck did he just encounter, or who. 1994, a man, I'll call him Ed for this story, was working at a fast food restaurant on North 10th Street in McAllen, which is right next door to Mission. In fact, you don't know when you leave Mission and enter McAllen. It's one of those kind of places. I'm going to call this guy Ed. After midnight, when the place was closed for the night, the workers would get busy cleaning the place, getting ready for the next day. One of the women, Janie for this story, needed a ride home, and so he offered to take her. She lived off of North Lahoma Road, well out of town. It was a long, lonely drive, so another coworker offered to go along so he wouldn't have to drive back on his own. The three got to her home, and she told her companions that right across the road was an old spooky tree where two witches would sit and watch her house. The two thought that she was just pulling their leg. When Ed asked if Janie was telling a tale, she dared him to go have a closer look. It was very dark as Ed crossed the road to the tree, and there, sitting on one of the bigger limbs, were two indistinct figures. Ed thought that maybe these were just a couple of big birds, like vultures or something. So he waved his hands in the air and he yelled and stomped his feet, trying to get these things to fly. Instead, they just stared at him, making a growling sound, kind of like a couple of dogs. Ed picked up a rock and he threw it at these two shapes. He hit one of them, and it made a yell. It sounded like an old lady screaming. Instead of flying away, these two shapes attacked him, chasing Ed back to Janie's house. As he came running, Janie and his coworker ran for the door as well. Once inside Janie's house, Ed looked out one of the windows and he saw these black shapes. They looked like old, withered women, like crones or old hags, really old witches. These three wound up sitting inside, waiting for these creatures to go away, but they simply kept circling the house, keeping them inside. As the sun was peeking up over the horizon, Ed looked outside. The two witches were nowhere to be seen. Him and his coworker thanked Janie for the use of her home all night long. They hurriedly walked to his car and jumped in and drove back towards McAllen. As they went, they passed two young ladies walking along the side of the road. One was holding a rag to her head with blood on it. The women both glared at the car as it went by them, as if they knew something. We have just about every cryptid on the planet known to man running around Texas. We have giant flying creatures, werewolves, dogmen, giant bat creatures, blood sucking fiends. One thing we don't have is lake monsters. Oh, there's a few stories running around about giant things in our lakes, but only having one natural lake in the entire state, it makes most of these sightings non starters. The first dam built in Texas was completed in 1893 along the Colorado River, which created Lake Austin. Every lake in Texas, with the exception of Caddo Lake, is man made. Mrs. Dilbert Gregg of Gregton, Texas, not very far from Caddo Lake, told her encounter with a shape shifting creature in 1960 issue of Fate magazine. She actually saw this thing changing from one form to the other. One night in 1958, while her husband was on a business trip, Mrs. Gregg moved her bed closer to the screen window, hoping to get a cool breeze from a thunderstorm that was brewing on the southwest horizon. This was back when few homes had air conditioning. She was awoken in the middle of the night to the sound from the window. Something was scratching at the screen. Looking from the dark room to the dark outside, she didn't see what was making the sound. When lightning lit the sky, the shape of a huge wolf like creature could be seen at the window. As she watched, the creature bared its teeth in a very unfriendly manner. Thinking that she must be mistaken, Mrs. Gregg grabbed a flashlight and shone it out the window. The man beast turned and ran for the bushes. Mrs. Gregg said she kept the light on it, and the thing ran into a clump of brush. It came out the other side, only now it was a tall, thin man who quickly walked away from her yard. It took a few minutes before Mrs. Gregg could equate the wolf at the window with the man walking from her property. I doubt she got any sleep the rest of that night. About 30 miles east from Gregton is Marshall, Texas. I've been to both towns, and it can be a bit spooky. Well, it can be a lot spooky driving some of those back roads in the middle of the night. They have a story about a man wolf which sounds like a wolf man or a dog man. From years ago, people reported seeing a half man, half wolf prowling around at night. It was known to kill and carry off farm animals. The beast was described as having the head of a wolf with yellow eyes. It had broad shoulders and arms more like a man. It had fingers with claws on them. The body was very muscular, and it walked on two legs with hocks like a dog or a wolf. Farmers didn't want to feed the local wildlife, especially when it meant that they might not eat themselves. One farmer, hearing his animals in an uproar, went out to chase off the predator. His wife found what was left of him laying in the yard, and the barn, and the road out front. Most sightings of this creature took place along Stagecoach Road. A few sightings were on Dead Woman's Road and Sedbury Street. A few years later, Mrs. Ethel Briggs lost her husband and son to the beast. She said she had seen the wolf man walking around the property right before finding what was left of her family. Any time somebody went missing, it was now being blamed on this creature. A young girl became pregnant after her encounter with the beast. 9 months later, she delivered a monster that was promptly killed by her mother. The remains were buried in a field behind their home. People began seeing wolf like creatures of various sizes. One person said they spotted a wolf man, or maybe wolf woman, walking along with a second smaller beast next to it. People began to suspect their neighbors or any stranger might be the shape shifting fiend. Folks began to get quite nervous. Witnesses came forward saying they had seen a woman known to the community as Ethel running naked along Dead Woman's Road. I want to know, why is it called Dead Woman's Road? I couldn't find it on a map, but I sure found a lot of references to it. A Dead Woman's Road in Marshall, Texas. A few said she was seen accompanied by her daughter. Some said the pair were covered in blood and acting as if they were animals instead of humans. Neighbors began saying they thought they had seen this same woman wearing a wolf belt along with nothing else. A wolf belt is a cursed object obtained from either the devil or through some magical form of incantation. The skin is made from skin. Well, that's redundant, isn't it? The belt is made from skin that has to be removed from a person while they're still alive. When the owner wants to become a wolf, they simply wrap this belt around their waist and the transformation takes place. Now, you won't see a wolf with a belt wrapped around its waist because it becomes part of their fur. When it's time to turn back, the wolf simply removes the belt and they become human again. In 1589, Peter Stump was arrested and formally accused of being a werewolf in Germany. He had eaten the flesh of goats, lambs, sheep, as well as men, women, and children over a 25-year period of time. Stump confessed to having practiced black magic since he was 12 years old, and he said that the devil had given him a magical belt that enabled him to metamorphose into a wolf. When the belt was removed, he would transform back to his human form. Back in Marshall, the sheriff decided that these stories needed investigating, and he went to question Ethel. In her house, he found several belts made from some kind of an unknown skin. I found a few different stories on what happened next. Some say that Ethel and her daughter were tried and executed for murder. Others say that the pair were simply lynched by a terrified community. Still others say that the sheriff told her that her and her daughter had best leave, get out of town before sundown and don't ever come back, kind of thing. She has vanished from history after that. Also out of Marshall is the story of Caroline Thomas from 1949. As an infant, she was carried off by a red wolf. For the next 50 years, people reported seeing a girl running around the country acting as if she were a wolf. Anytime the locals managed to corner her, she fought like a wild animal, and she was able to escape running on her hands and feet. She was described as being covered in dirt, which made her skin look dark as if she were covered with hair. Her hair that she did have was long, and it was filled with leaves and twigs and just an all around mess. And she hadn't had a haircut her entire life. Stories of this wild girl were heard from Jefferson to the north, Scottsville to the east, and in Marshall. Caroline was seen in 1990 by a Jefferson police officer. He saw her on Polk Street at the park. She was there along with several large dogs or coyotes. She would have been about 50 years at the time of the last sighting. How Marshall, Texas got so many werewolf or dogman reports makes me wonder. We go to Jefferson a lot and we stay in an RV park outside of town. Usually we're the only ones there. There are many stories of spirits of those killed by werewolf or werewolves. Ghosts can be seen wandering about the countryside from Marshall to Jefferson. I'm going to really keep my eyes open next time I make that drive. Others say that Marshall, Texas Dogman takes the physical form of a man as a living person, woman, child, or recently dead family member or loved one, and then persuades its next chosen victim to follow him to the unknown place out in the woods where they are led into a trap or left forever lost on their way with no way out. Texas is a hopping place when it comes to paranormal activity. Come to think of it, most of our planet has some form of a bizarre things going on. You just have to do some research and you'll find some scary things to make your life a bit more thrilling. The secret is just don't get too courageous while looking into things like this. Ask around, hear the stories, write them down. Just don't go out in the woods in the middle of the night by yourself looking for a dogman encounter. You might just become a statistic. If you do have any good or bad ghost stories, cryptid stories, bizarre stories from your family, from friends, as long as you're sure that they're true stories, send them to me and I will put them in my next book. You can contact me at strangethings at arcanasa.com. If you don't want to share them with me or the public, write them down anyway. Put them in a notebook, put a special file on your computer. Just put down as many facts as you can remember and store it away for future reference. Someday you might decide to write a book, or after you're gone, your family will find it and think, wow, that's strange. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. Wrong mouse. There it is.